Before and after Sefirah Sa'omer, there are a number of Tefilos that appear in the Siddur. I wanted to talk about some of those Tefilos that appear in the Siddur. I know in my shul, a lot of times when people are not used to davening in my shul, so right after, or right before Aleinu, so I'll immediately say, Baruch Atah Hashem, I say the bracha in my shul, and our minhag is the rabbi does it rather than the Shliach Tzibur, just in case you have a Shliach Tzibur who's not still counting with the bracha, we don't want to embarrass him. The rabbi doesn't mind embarrassing himself so much, but the people are very often stunned because I don't stop to give time for people to say L'Shem Yichud, and it says in the Siddur L'Shem Yichud before Sefirah Sa'omer. But it does, not just the two lines of L'Shem Yichud, it then goes into a whole Hinni Muchon Mezum L'Chaim Mitzvah Shel Sefirah Sa'omer Kamosh Kasav BaTorah, and because Svartam L'Chaim Machos Shabbos quotes Psukim and tells how we're about to do the mitzvah, and then after Sefirah Harachmanu Yachzu Lo Navos Beisim Mezum Kol Meher V'Yameinu, and then we have a whole Lam Natseach, and then a whole Kabbalistic Tefillah, an Anu B'Koach plus Kabbalistic Tefillah after that. So what's the story with all of these tefillos? Are you supposed to say all of them? You're not supposed to say all of them. Where do they come from? So L'Shem Yichud is not really Sefirah Sa'omer Inyan. L'Shem Yichud is a tefillah that in many sidurim is printed before Hanachas Tefillin, before Ituf Betzitzis, Betalis, right? It's before in many Haggados. You have L'Shem Yichuds all over the place, before Achilas Matzah, before Achilas Maror. It's something that Hasidim do before they do any mitzvah, L'Shem Yichud. It gained unusual popularity with Sefirah Sa'omer, but something that's really before any mitzvah. So Nadav Yehuda was the most vocal in raising his voice in objection to L'Shem Yichud. In Yardea, Madura Kama, Siman Sadi Gimel, the Nadav Yehuda has a tshuva about this, and then again in Siman Kuf Zayin in Tinyana, also he discusses it, and he says, you ask me what the Perush of L'Shem Yichud is. Malanu legalos Perush al dvarim shalom atzinu b'divrei shnei talmudim bavli v'Yerushalmi v'lo b'Sefri v'Sefra v'Tosefta v'lo b'divrei poskim. There's no Perush to something that has no source. It doesn't appear in Bavli, doesn't appear in Yerushalmi, Sefri, Sefra, Tosefta. I can't give you a Perush. So I don't even know who allowed you to make this tefillah. The Doros HaRishonim never had such a nusach, and he felt very strongly about this. He goes on a diatribe in both places against the L'Shem Yichud, and he surmises that the reason people started doing the L'Shem Yichud is because we're so much weaker in Torah than the previous generations that we try to latch on to other things that are not Torah oriented as a way of compensating for a lack of genuine Torah knowledge and genuine Yiras Shamayim. So as our compensation, we try to grasp onto straws, and he says it's really not appropriate at all. And he even says the line Valadora Yasom Hazeh Ani Omer about this generation of Yisomim. I say Yesharim Darkei Hashem, the ways of the Lord are righteous. Tzadikim Yelchu Bahem, the tzadikim will go in them, and the way the pasuk is supposed to finish is Uposhim Yikashlu Bam. Right? What does he say? The Chasidim Yikashlu Bam, and the Chasidim are all being nichshal. That's in later editions of the Nadav Yehuda, they took out that way. They thought that was too charif. They took out that he mamish replaced the word poshim with Chasidim, like such a misnagate that they just changed it to a poshim Yikashlu Bam. Doesn't make sense. And you say you poshim mikash l'bam, like what? No, but his point was that the Hasidim are saying l'shem yichud that they're making this terrible mistake. The Tshuva Me'ava writes that he doesn't really understand what the Rebbe was talking about. That the Tshuva Me'ava was Talmud Nadav Yehuda. He says this prayer has been around for 150 years. It wasn't like invented in the days of the Nadav Yehuda. We do have somewhat earlier sources, but still 150 years in the span of Jewish history. Nadav Yehuda's point is it wasn't in the Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, Sefra, etc. We don't find it anywhere in Chazal. So the fact that it's been there for 150 years is not enough to defend it. So why would one say it? So there are three possible reasons that one would want to say L'Shem Yichud, all of which the Nadav Yehuda deals with. One of them is that for Kavana in the raya that people bring that at the beginning of Masechus Zvachim, by a get you need to say that you're doing it L'Shem Gerushin. So you need to verbalize that it's being done L'Shem l'shem gerushin. So maybe also by other mitzvahs that you need to verbalize you're doing it, what you're doing it for. So you need to verbalize you're doing this l'shem yichud kudsha brichu. So it says not that is patently false, and in fact that Gemara is a raya lehepech, because that Gemara says that it's only by an isha who's stam alav l'gerushin omedes. In typical isha, we don't assume that she's just waiting to get divorced. But by kachim, where stam on lishma, you don't have to verbalize anything by kachim. You assume it's stam lishma. By mitzvos, which are kache shemayim, it's kache gavoa mitzvos. All mitzvos are kodesh kadashim. So it's stam lishma. You don't need to say that you're doing it l'shem Hashem. It's stam lishma. Another reason that the says you might want to say it is that there is this concept of doing a maisa fully involves fusing together dibur, machshava, and maisa. So when the mitzvah is not only done b'maisa and not only done b'machshava, but you enunciate what you're about to do, dibur also. So that's the highest form of any action. So the Rebbe says, I agree, that's nice, and that's exactly why the Ritva says you make a birchas mitzvah. That's where the dibur comes in. You make a birchas mitzvah, and that will be a fulfillment. And if you don't have a birchas mitzvah, you want to say yehi ratzon, fine. But where does l'shem yichud come from? I don't know. He says. And al derech nister, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, there are some that say, well, l'shem yichud it accomplishes things kabbalistically that we don't understand. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the Siddur says that his father, the Chacham Tzvi, never said l'shem yichud, even though everything he did was based on the Ariyah Kadosh. Yet if you look in the Siddur of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, you'll find right on the bottom where he says, never ever, we don't say l'shem yichud. The nusach of the actual siddur that they print is the typical nusach of the siddur, so it has l'shem yichud in the siddur, which is ironic. But Rabbi Yaakov Emden's, I could assure you, his version of the siddur did not have it. But when they republished it later, they just kept some other version of the siddur, and all the things Rabbi Yaakov Emden says not to say they have, all the things he says to say they don't have. They didn't really make the adjustments. The Chidah says about this Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Kivan Shabbat l'chlal kas al chasidei dor. Since he got so upset at the Hasidim, he made this terrible mistake. That it's really not true. It is based on Kabbalistic sources. It is based on their results. So there's an old debate about l'shem yichud, whether you should say it or not. So so I figured in a non-Hasidic shul like mine, so we don't say l'shem yichud. So I don't give time to say l'shem yichud. Someone wants to say it on their own, they're more than welcome to. But that's not our minhag. What about the actual Yehiratz and the actual Hilni Muchan rather that we say right before? So it's I'm sorry, on l'shem yichud still, it is a little bit strange that of all the mitzvos that people do, for some reason people don't say l'shem yichud on anything else, not a matzah, not a morah, not in tefillin, not in tzitzis, not in talis, nothing else, they say it by Sefirah Omer. Why? Because it appears in the Siddur by Sefirah Omer, and the brachas and tefillin, they're not looking in the Siddur, they know it by heart. So even though it appears there also by Sefirah Omer, they're looking in the Siddur, and it says it by Sefirah Omer. So some have suggested that there may be other reasons. Rabbi Cohen once told me, he thought that it's to distinguish between tefillah and the mitzvah. That when you have the whole, since we do it right after davening, it may look like it's part of tefillah, but it's not. It's just an independent mitzvah. So we dafka say l'shem yichud to show, no, this is a mitzvah. This isn't part of tefillah. Rabbi Bolzim suggested to me that maybe it's based on the idea that so much of Sefirah is kabbalistic. There's so much Kabbalah in Sefirah. The Hod Shabbat Tefilos and Tefilos Shabbat, all these different kabbalistic meanings to Sefirah Omer. So maybe dafka by Sefirah Omer, the Kabbalah plays a more important role. What about the Hinni Muchan Mezuman that we say? So the problem is that in the Hinni Muchan Mezuman you say that you're about to be Mekayim Mitzvah of Sefirah Omer, K'mosh Kasav B'Torah, like it says in the Torah. According to the way we paskin, Sefirah Omer B'Zman says only D'Rabbanan. So to say we're doing K'mosh Kasav B'Torah is really a lie, because that would be D'Oraisa K'mosh Kasav B'Torah. So and not only and that's problematic. The Rambam writes that if you say that eating chicken and milk is an issa d'oraisa, so that's a violation of Baal Tosef by claiming it's an issa d'oraisa. So to call something that's d'Rabbanan a d'oraisa violation of Baal Tosef, and the Piskei Teshuvos, he quotes from the Teshuvos Divrei Moshe or Chaim Simon Chav Tes, that not only is it may be a Baal Tosef problem, it's also a problem in that it's a direct stira with the harachaman that you say right after Sefirah. Right after Sefirah, you say Harachman Yachzalon Avos Beisam Kom Meher V'Yameinu. Why do you say that? Because you're trying to say, look, I just did the mitzvah D'Rabbanan Sefirah Omer, but I really wish we had the Beis Hamikdash so that I'd be able to do this mitzvah midoraisa, the real way. That's why we have the whole Arachman there. So to say right beforehand, I'm doing it like it says it in the Torah, and then say the Arachman afterwards is stira minei ubei. It's a direct contradiction to each other. So that's why maybe it doesn't. And the Harachman is really correct because we paskin really is the Rabbanan B'zman Hazeh. So even the whole nusach of the Hinni Muchad seems to be a little bit off. What about what we say afterwards? So the Harachman we just explained. You say the Harachman afterwards because you're trying to say that we want the mitzvah back the way it used to be done. Then there's a kapitel Tehillim that appears in the Siddur right after Sefirah Summer. So that appears there because apparently it has 49 words corresponding to the 49 days of Sefirah. So it makes for the perfect kapitel Tehillim to say right after Sefirah. And then we have the Ana B'Koach and this Kabbalistic Tefilos. So that was very controversial. The Shulchan Aruch Rav thought that Shulchan Aruch Rav writes that a lot of people say this Ana B'Koach and this Ribbon Shalom, but the Aruch HaShulchan says that Rabim Hisra'amu al Amiros Devarim Elu, that a lot of people didn't like this. They thought that this was not right because these are Devarim Ha'umdim B'Rumah Shalom. Most of us have no understanding of what these things mean, and therefore it's not appropriate. The Aruch HaShulchan says, but now the whole Hamon says it, so maybe it's okay. So a lot of others were really unhappy about this idea of saying all of these Kabbalistic tefillos. So Sefirah Summer, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's a mitzvah midrabanan b'zman hazeh, and you should do it like a mitzvah. It has a birchas a mitzvah with a kiyuma mitzvah, and the other tefillos, some of them are more important than others. Harachaman certainly makes sense to remind us of what it is. The kapitel Tillim is never a bad idea, but a lot of the other things, sometimes you're playing with fire, and it's appropriate to know what your family tradition is, and whether you generally go with the more Hasidish Al Pi Kabbalah customs or not, whether you should say these tefillos or not.